On to number 25 here. We are reaching it. We're coming close to an end. I know. Thank you for staying with me for ever so long. I appreciate it, but we're getting there close. What we can see here is that the first maxim, there are a few rules for this categorical imperative. The first premise is that a person acts morally if his or her conduct would, without condition, be the right conduct for any person in a similar circumstance. So, this short video up online, Kant in 3 minutes, makes the example that if I am married, then it would be inappropriate for me to flirt with, a colleague or somebody else at work, because I would not appreciate it, even though it may be harmful. I would not appreciate it. It's not going anywhere physical. I know that I, as a human being, would not like it if my spouse were to do the same thing. So, if I can act in a way that I can look at any other person, if I can look at you and put you in my shoes and say, well, would I mind if this person acted this way? Then that could be considered right as a first rule, okay? So, if I am deciding to smoke crack or not, I would have to put you in my shoes and say, well, I too am a graduate of Fairfield Prep. If any one of my students were to be in this situation, it would upset me greatly, and therefore I have to recall that at one point there were teachers here who cared about me, and they would be upset by the idea of me making these kinds of decisions, okay? So it's a one-to-one comparison. As we move on, we're on number 26 now. The second maxim. The second premise is that conduct is right if it treats others as ends in and of themselves and not as means to an end. All right, we hear this a lot. We heard this from Martin Luther King. We heard this from Father Pedro Arrupi at the beginning of the year with his Men for Others speech. You can't treat people, you can't use people for your own means, for your own gains. That ain't right. All right, no matter how you slice it, that's not right. So what does that mean? Well, if we take a look at the kind of business idea of networking, like if I'm going to network with you, then I'm going to take my contacts and the people that I know and the friends that I know, and I'm going to share them with you, and I know that you're only using me based on the experience of the people that I know, and you know that you're only being used for the people that you know and the contacts that you have. It's a very strange kind of relationship. It could never ever lead to anything more meaningful. It just kind of is. I mean, and because it is, it's very unnatural. It's not a natural relationship to just simply have a person in your life for one specific reason, okay? And this is true on a lot of different levels. We talk about, and especially with your age group, occasionally you may know a person who has a friend with benefits, if you will. And this is a person that, has a friend and they do not have any kind of relationship or commitment to one another, but occasionally they will, do sexual things with one another. Now, that's kind of the opposite of what personhood should be. You're using that person as an object. And as we've seen with Kant up until this point, that's unacceptable because people are not objects. People are more than animals. They're better than animals, and animals are not objects. You wouldn't even use an animal for that purpose, so how could you possibly use a person for that purpose? And you may make all sorts of different types of excuses about this type of world. This is that nobody's getting hurt, they both agreed to it, you're consenting adults, and da-da-da-da-da-da. But I think that what Kant is counting on here is that somewhere deep down, you know that this behavior is unnatural. You know that this behavior is not good, if you will, to use a very loaded term, but it's not good for the two of you. All right? So that kind of is the best way to sum up the second maxim. The last maxim on slide number 27 here is that a person will act morally when he or she acts as if their action were to establish a universal law. So, can I jaywalk? Well, no, I can't. Because if I jaywalk, then I would need to imagine every single other person in the world ignoring the crosswalks. All right? And this is a difficult one for me to even justify because I could care less about jaywalking in our town. But you know that if you go to New York and you are in Times Square and you jaywalk, there's a good chance you're going to get hurt. And if you can imagine just all of those people just walking willy-nilly, it wouldn't work. So we need to follow some rules for the betterment of society. All right? Let's take some other ones that are difficult to look at. And I have a picture of Maxim magazine here because it's a cute little wordplay. You know, Kant talks about his different maxims, and we're going to use Maxim magazine as an example. This is the tamest Maxim cover that I could find. And you can see there's a young lady named Stacy Keebler, who I recall was involved in the WWF at one point on the cover here. And good old Stace is in a very provocative position, and she is pretty super sexualized. So let's apply Kant's third maxim to Maxim magazine. Is Maxim magazine good for society? Should a person purchase Maxim magazine? Kant would have to say no. And the reason being is because if every male looked at and viewed women in this overly sexualized way, then you would never be able to have a relationship with a woman that was not based on some kind of objectification of females and their body parts. Okay? Now, I know that this sounds like ultra hippie liberal crap, but think about it for a minute, all right? What does looking at an abnormal amount of pornography do to you? Does it hurt anybody outside of yourself? Probably not. You can make an argument, but it's a very tenuous argument, but you can make an argument that it might hurt the people who are involved because, you know, they as individual human beings are not benefiting from this type of lifestyle. They may be making a lot of money, but they're objectified and they are, you know, selling their bodies and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really, it's a one-to-one type of a problem. You're not, you know, in this relation, if we're going to use a utilitarian argument, pornography is not a bad thing because the only two people that can be hurt in this experience are you and your image of human beings and objectifying human beings, looking at them as simply bodies and, you know, boobs and butts and penises and things like that, which is such a very small part of who we are as human beings. So that it hurts you and it hurts the person because they start to think of themselves as only those parts as well, because that's what they're being paid for. They're being paid to be those things. Okay? So if we look at a utilitarian argument, then certainly pornography is not as bad for us as a society as, say, Bernie Madoff. You know, so if you have a person like who's involved in a Madoff-like Ponzi scheme, that person and every single person involved with Madoff should be murdered. based on the amount of damage they did to the people that they did it to. You know, whereas on the sliding scale, you might get a stern eyebrow for being involved in pornography, regardless of age or anything like that. And I hope this makes sense. I'm trying to give you an example because we typically look down on this industry and we look down on these different people. And for Kant, we look down on them and we look down on it because of what it does to us as a whole. All right? If every human being, let's just stick with males and let's just stick with heterosexual relationships right now. If every heterosexual male were to read Maxim magazine and look at pornography, which granted are different things, but not that much different. If they were to look at these different things, then they would have difficulty being in real relationships with women, and therefore it would hurt our society. If every woman, in turn, was willing to be objectified in this manner, that would also hurt their ability to be in relationships with men, and therefore it would hurt our whole society. So, because we can't imagine the action of me reading this type of a magazine to be universally good, we can't do it. All right. So I know that sounds, and as we move on to 28, it sounds too difficult. It sounds too hard. It sounds like you're going to be making choir boys all the time. All right. Kant believes that human beings are actually fundamentally flawed. So if we were to all follow the categorical imperative, we would all be perfect people, but that's not possible. All right? So just like the nominal world is a place that we can't reach, the categorical imperative is something that we cannot perfect. That doesn't mean that you don't stop working towards it, but it just means that the expectation is not that you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and just be perfect. It's not possible. All right? So the third antinomy is this idea that the third contradiction, human beings are fundamentally flawed. Okay? They are evil in nature, they are selfish in nature, and yet the contradiction is that they're forced to be in community, and they're forced to deal with other human beings, and therefore they have to make decisions based on the greater good for the whole. So we move on to rational self-interest, 29. With all of our combined beliefs, emotions, ideas, we still can deny our basic intuition and understanding. So even though we look at ourselves as being good human beings, if we see ourselves, if we are seen in society as being good human beings, we will still deny that goodness and make evil, selfish decisions. It's going to happen. So we have a rational self-interest, and we'll fall back into it, we'll fall back into using our free will to make evil decisions. But one way to work out of this is by affirming our rational self-interest and that we deny our short-term pleasures in order to have long-term happiness. All right, so we don't look at the Maxim magazine now, so that when we're older, we can have realistic relationships with women